those who don't know me, I'm Craig Frisk. I'm a veterinarian who has worked in research all my entire career of over 40 years now. I'm not only a lab animal veterinarian, but I'm also I have a PhD in veterinary pathology, that's what brought me to the clinic, because we compare diseases that occur in humans to those that occur in animals, and that's what I've done for the last 35 years here. And through all that, I've used a lot of different animals, and I'm also been a member of Calvary Baptist here for 35 years. So just starting out here, what are my beliefs? Well, I'm a young Earth creationist. I believe in the literal Bible account, which I'm going to go through pretty much in detail here this morning or this afternoon, and that God supernaturally created the universe. He created everything within the universe. He did it out of nothing in 6 literal 24-hour calendar days. And he did that in recent times, certainly less than 10,000 years. And so there are some important events to remember when you look at the Bible. Recent creation, which I'll talk about primarily today, and then the other 2 significant supernatural changes to creation, which occurred because of sin in both cases, was the curse and the judgment of God by a worldwide flood. Now, Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is, of course, a foundational verse of the Bible. And many commentators, if you look in various different commentators on the Bible, state that this is a summary verse, and it says that God created everything in the entire universe. And I'm not trying to tell you that he didn't. I believe he did. But on the other hand, this is not a foundational verse. Or this is not a summary verse, I should say. It is the first act of God of creation by God. And it occurs on the first day of the creation week. This confuses a lot of people. It gets you into the day-age theory, and it gets you into all kinds of crazy things that occur, and the gap theory and everything else. This is not a summary verse. It is the first act that God did. So what did he do then? Well, if you asked most people what did God create on the first day, their answer almost always is going to be light. He created a lot more than light on day 1. I'm going to show you what he created from a scientific standpoint on day 1 here in a second. So does Genesis 1:1 here state anything with regard to science? In the beginning means time. Time started. Time is part of our universe. So just the first 3 words, in the beginning, means time started at that particular point. He created the heavens and the earth. The heavens, God created the component of the universe known as space. We think of space as just nothingness. It's just outer space that's out there. But that had to be created. The universe has got a lot of space in it, as we know. But that had to be created by God. And the last thing that he said, he created the heavens and the earth. The earth is a component of matter in the universe. The creation of the elementary particles of matter with mass, and that's what he created. Now, in other words, he's creating the most basic building blocks, which everything else in the universe is going to be created from. That's what the first verse says in the Bible. And these elementary particles with mass are termed fermions. This is quantum physics now, but hang on here. Don't get scared by the names here. But I can tell you that this stuff that I'm talking about here is primarily from Stephen Hawking, who's about as far away from a a creationist as you can possibly get in this world today. And but he's a theoretical physicist, and a lot of these information and the things I've got about the quantum physics part of this is from his writings. So he produced the elementary particles with mass, which are termed fermions, quantum physics. These are subatomic particles. So this matter is a basic building blocks that everything is going to be created, including the atoms, which are the most basic building blocks for all the things in the universe. But electrons, protons, neutrons they're all fermions. So in the beginning, time starts. God created the heavens, he created space, and he created matter. A continuum of time, space, and matter. So, does this verse state anything with regard to science? You bet it does. So you go on to verse 2, and this confuses a lot of people. It says, "And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep." Well, why was the matter that was created in Genesis 1, as it's described here in verse 2, why is it without form, void, and dark? This is the Hebrew word for without form, and it means formlessness, place of chaos. This really throws people. That which is unreal. Well, the initial creation in verse 1 covers time, space, and matter, but it is not a completed system. The initial act of creation brought apart the elementary particles of matter with mass, which are fermions. Fermions alone cannot make up a completed functioning universe. And what I'm talking about here now is from quantum physics. The universe doesn't only contain fermions. The universe also contains energy forces that act upon that matter, the fermions, and they're called bosons. Without bosons, there are no forces to keep the fermions organized. In other words, there's no energy. And that is when you see the second part of verse 2, it says, "And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." He moves upon the face of the waters, and it's interesting that the part of the Godhead that actually energizes the universe is the Holy Spirit. And that's what he's about to do here. And Genesis 1:3, of course, says, "And God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light." Energized. That's what this is all about. Light is a photon. Photons were created in verse 3. The photons are a specific type of boson. And boson are the elementary force particles that interact with matter, the fermions. And with all now you can make things with this. Before you couldn't. That's why verse 2 it's not a completed system at that time. That's why it's confusing to try to understand it. So light is part of the electromagnetic spectrum, but as you can see, light is just a very, very small part. Visible light is just a very small part of this whole spectrum, which goes from radio waves to gamma waves. They're all of this is through photons, though, as the energy particle. There are only 4 forces of energy forces in the entire universe. Only 4. Electromagnetism, the boson is the photon. It's responsible for all chemistry and biology. That's what everything is made out of. Gravity is another energy force. The boson there is the graviton, although it's theoretical. It's never been shown to exist. It's interesting that people just don't understand gravity still to this day, long after it was, of course, it's been around since the beginning. And then there's weak nuclear forces, and that has to do with radioactive decay, and the strong nuclear is the gluon. And it's interesting that in Colossians it says that who holds everything together is Jesus Christ is holding everything together. And a lot of people feel, including myself, feel that that's a reference to the strong nuclear forces, the gluon. But it holds the protons and neutrons in the nucleus of the atom. And it takes a tremendous amount of force to do that just with one atom. So these are the 4 energy sources there are. So what did God create on the first day? He created the basic building blocks of the universe: time, space, matter, energy, and forces. He created these elementary particles of matter and the energy forces, the fermions with mass, the bosons, force carriers without mass. That's what he did. So the Bible does have science in it. And it's interesting that this stuff just came about recently. I mean, fermions, bosons, everything else, that's certainly in my lifetime that these things were just named that, and the subatomic particle, elementary particle work has been going on and is going on now, as a matter of fact. But it's interesting that the Bible actually has it in it thousands of years ago. You just have to be able to recognize it if you know anything about quantum physics. Of course, most quantum physicists aren't creationists, and they're not even going to look at it from this standpoint. But it's interesting that quantum physics, there are 2 possible kinds of things in the universe. The 2 particle types are known as fermions, matter, and bosons, forces. They're both on the first day. They're both in the first 3 verses of the Bible. The interaction between fermions and bosons describes all physical form in the universe. Isn't that interesting? I mean, it's interesting. People say, oh, this book is, the first part of this book is totally legend, and and certainly the book talks about theology, but it's not accurate in anything else. It's certainly not accurate in science. The first 3 verses. It's quantum physics is what it is. So at the end of the first day, what do you have? There's a spherical Earth hanging in space. Oops, I keep hitting the wrong button here. Where am I? There we go. These buttons are right together. There is a spherical earth hanging in space. Job 26:7 says, he hangeth the earth upon nothing. And hanging in space, the space, and I'm going to get into spaces here in a second, is the astrosphere. That's what outer space is. It's the astrosphere. God creates everything in a very organized manner in the first 6 days. First 3 days, he creates spaces. Day 1, astrosphere. And we're going to go through the other days here in a second. The next 3 days, days 4, 5, and 6, God fills those spaces that he has created in the same order in which they were created. You can always remember what God created on what day if you just remember the spaces and what goes in those spaces. You've got it. It's easy. It's very, very well organized. So day 2, the spaces that he creates there is the hydrosphere and the atmosphere. You look at the 6th and 7th verses, let there be a firmament. Firmament is the atmosphere, which I'm going to show you here in a second. In the midst of the waters, that's the waters is the hydrosphere. Hydro, of course, refers to water. And let it divide the waters from the waters. It says, divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. 2 spaces. First one, atmosphere. Firmament means really expanse. That's what the Hebrew word really means. It's a reference to the atmosphere between 2 waters. Genesis 1:20, which is where the birds are talked about on day 5, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. It's exactly the same words. Where are the birds flying? Well, they're flying in the atmosphere. So, therefore, the atmosphere is the air. It's the envelope of gases that surrounds the earth. The hydrosphere, the waters under the atmosphere, would be on the earth and would cover the entire earth at this particular time. There's no land on the earth at this time. Shoreless ocean, as John Whitcomb calls it. And the waters above the firmament would form a canopy or a cover. Now, I said canopy, and there's a lot of creationists out there that have, we might say, thrown the canopy under the bus. I haven't done that. The reason I haven't done that is because of the verses we just looked at. It clearly states that the waters are divided. It also clearly states that they are above and below the atmosphere. It clearly states it. And I know the verses in Psalms, and if you look up the verses in Psalms, I think it's 104 or 108, one of the two, but it has reference, and one of the criticisms is that it says the same thing. If you look up the Hebrew words in that case, the only Hebrew word that's the same is water. The rest, so I don't buy that argument. Also, there's two things that it occurs. One of them is a canopy makes it a mild temperature all over the world. You've got to get mild temperatures everywhere because Antarctica has subtropical vegetation on it. You got to. Somehow you've got to do that. There's no explanation for it without this, or at least I haven't heard of a good one. The other thing is it increases the atmospheric pressure, and that we know is a healthier situation. We've done research on animals, on healing many times with hyperbaric chambers. Mayo has done research doing that, and I can tell you things heal a lot better with higher atmospheric pressures. So based on that, I have not thrown the canopy under the bus. Now maybe at some point in time someone will convince me that it's wrong and that it shouldn't be followed, but so far I haven't done it. But a lot of people have. As a matter of fact, Genesis 1:1, if you go to their website, it says, this is something that shouldn't be taught anymore. And here I am teaching it. Anyway, it does retain water vapor, if it's up in the air, is going to retain incoming solar radiation. So it produces a global greenhouse. And you get a more uniform temperatures all over the world. The condition would result in mild temperatures, so you don't have ice caps like you do today. There would be no deserts. And evolutionists admit Antarctica was once warm, had animals in it, has trees growing in it. You know what the average temperature year-round, or the average temperature taking into account both winter and summer of the South Pole, 57 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. 57 below. That's the average. It's unbelievable. The highest recorded temperature at the South Pole is 9 degrees, well below freezing. If it snows there, nothing melts. Mayo had a group go down to the South Pole 3 times. I knew a couple of the people that went down there. They said it's unbelievable. And they were there in the summer. But they said it's just so cold, you just cannot believe it. But and they weren't there in the wintertime when it really gets cold. And the average temperatures in the winter are in the 70s below. How in the world can you have subtropical vegetation with animals and trees growing there at those temperatures? There's got to be some reason. There's got to be something that warms that up. So the 2 spaces created on day 2 are the hydrosphere, the water, and the atmosphere, the air surrounding the... So we've got outer space, the astrosphere, hydrosphere, and atmosphere. Those are 3 spaces. Day 3, recorded in the 9th and 10th verses, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land is the next area or next space. It's called the lithosphere. appear, and it was so, and God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas. Let the earth bring forth vegetation, or bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after its kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth, and it was so. So the plants are created on day 3. The part of the space that is being called is the biosphere. And the general types of plants which are created are talked about. And if you think of any plant, you can categorize it into one of these 3 categories that God gave us. Either grasses, bushes essentially, and trees. And if you think about any plant, it's going to be in one of those 3 categories. And day 3, the lithosphere and plant biospheres are formed as spaces. And the plant biosphere is from the treetops up here all the way down to the ground. That's biologically, that's what the plant biosphere is. So you've got those spaces created on the first 3 days, 1, 2, and 3. So a summary of the first 3 days, you have the outer space, astrosphere, formed on day 1, and then you have the atmosphere and the hydrosphere on day 2, and the lithosphere and biosphere on day 3. That's it. Now what does God do? Shows his organizational expertise. In the next 3 days, he fills those spaces in which he's created in the first 3 days, and he does it in the same order that he created the spaces. So he creates on day 4, he fills what he created on 3, 5, what he created on day 2, 6, what he created on day 3. It's very, very organized. A lot of people have looked at this and they just, they get confused about this, but if you get this down, it's very easy. So the 4th day, God fills the astrosphere, the space that was created on day 1. So the 14th and 16th verses say, and God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven. The firmament of the heaven is the astrosphere. To divide the day and the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons. Seasons are mentioned here. Means the earth is tilted. The earth is tilted at this particular time. Otherwise, you don't get seasons at all. And for days, which a day is, of course, the rotation of the earth, and for years, which is the revolution of the earth around the sun. God made 2 great lights, the greater light, of course, the sun, to rule the day, the lesser light is the moon, of course, to rule the night, and he made the stars also. Of course, this includes the wandering stars, which are the planets. So, we get the sun, moon, and all the stars created on day 4. They're filling the astrosphere, which was created on 1. Day 5, animal life is created for what was created on day 2, the hydrosphere and the atmosphere, the spaces that were created on day 2. And if you look at the 20 and 21st verse, and God said, let the waters, the hydrosphere, bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament atmosphere of heaven. Fowl, by the way, means flying. It doesn't necessarily just mean birds in this case. The Hebrew word means that it are those animals that fly. Of course, we know there are more animals than birds that fly. And God created, uses the word bara there. Only God can create, as far as Hebrew word bara. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The word created there was also bara, which means he's bringing something into existence that didn't have existence prior to that. And he created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly, after their kind, every winged fowl, after his kind, and God saw that it was good. Now, just taking a look at this word bara, the Hebrew word, as I said, is used for the second time. It was used the first time in Genesis 1:1. Now it's used for the second time. It is in reference to God, only reference to God. In other words, it's an activity only God can accomplish. And what does he accomplish here? He creates animals that possess consciousness. They have a conscious life. And that's what is being stated here. Now, for instance, some of these things just start making sense to you. Is there life on other planets? Are there such a thing as aliens? No, there isn't. The reason is because on day 5, God creates this conscious life. When did he create everything on day 4? He created all the stars and everything on day 4. This did not exist at that time. It never says that God goes back and brings this consciousness to life outside this earth. It's only here in the hydrosphere, atmosphere, lithosphere. That's it. There's no life anywhere else. None. So don't think that there's, aliens out there that are going to come in here and land and everything else. It's not going to happen. According to the Bible, it's not going to happen. And I would say because of that, it's not going to happen. So day 5, you have, as it says there, animals are created in the hydrosphere. There are, of course, whales, and there's the lobster here, of course, the fish. Anything that lives in the water, marine animals, in other words. And animals that, as I said, the word fowl really refers to animals that fly, and you have more than just birds. This eagle here, you have insects, of course, bats, and then the pterosauruses or the pteranodons, the flying reptiles that are now extinct. Another reason why I still hang on to the canopy theory is because the increased atmospheric pressure allows these animals to fly when they cannot fly in our present atmosphere. Aerodynamically impossible. So, you increase the pressure, you do that. How do you do that without a canopy? I don't know. The people who are picking apart the canopy theory don't ever address that. And it's said, after their kind. In other words, there's no room for evolution here. A robin is going to have robins, and a killer whale is going to have a killer whale. They're not going to change into something else. So then you come to the 6th day. 6th day, he fills those things that he created on day 3. The lithosphere, plant biosphere, the land surfaces with animal life, in other words. And he creates domestic animals, wild land animals, the creeping and crawling animals, and finally, man. Day 6, he fills the lithosphere, and as it says in the 24th verse there, and God said, "Let the earth," which is the lithosphere, "bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing and beasts of the earth after his kind," and it was so. So they're listed here as cattle, which is a representative of the domestic animals. The creeping thing, this word really refers to reptile in the Hebrew, and the beasts of the earth, which are the wild land animals. So you've got domestic animals here. I've got sheep in here, and then of course the wild land animals. Got a zebra making sure that he sees that lion. And of course, after his kind, again, is used many, many times here. In 2 verses describing the animals created on day 5 and 6, after his kind is used 5 times and is used for every category of animal. There is no room here at all for evolution. After his kind, after his kind, after his kind. It's stated many, many times for emphasis. I would say the reason God put it in there so many times is he knew somebody would come up with a theory of evolution, and everybody would be saying, well, this animal becomes that animal, this animal becomes that animal, and there's a evolutionary tree. But he states it 5 times in 2 verses. No, it's always after its kind. It's also interesting that these animals were created sexually mature to go out and multiply. It's the command God gives the animals right away. So, at the end of day 6, of course, or the last thing he creates, I don't know though it was the end of the day, but the last thing he creates is man, is created, of course, in the image of God, and we just heard about that from Carl Kirby in the last hour. And in Genesis 27, and we just saw this also, so God created again. The word bara is being used here. He's creating something different than he's created. We may have the consciousness of animals, but certainly we're different than animals, and we're totally different because we're created in his own image. In the image of God created he, him, male and female created he, them. He uses it 3 times in one verse. So we're created in the image and likeness of God himself. In other words, we have characteristics that are similar to God, and most importantly, we have an eternal spirit. We will spend eternity somewhere, and if you're a Christian and have accepted Christ as your Savior, that will be in fellowship with God. So, just as a summary of this, got day 1, 2, and 3, the spaces, 4, 5, and 6. He's filling the spaces. So his astrosphere on 1, he fills it with the sun, moon, and stars and planets on 4. Day 2 is the hydrosphere and atmosphere. Fills it with marine animals and animals that fly here. 3, the lithosphere and plant biosphere, and he fills it with land animals and man on that side. It's pretty simple. It's very, very well organized. So, day 6, man is placed, of course, in the Garden of Eden. Adam's given one command. You're not to eat of this one tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Don't eat that tree. Don't eat of that tree. It's the only command he's given. And the warning that goes along with that is if he does eat it, thou shalt surely die. And this act of eating of the tree would only show Adam's disobedience to God. There was no advantage to eating of this tree other than just showing disobedience. And what does Adam do? Well, he rejects God's right to rule over his life, and that's essentially what sin is, rejecting God's rule, God's right to rule over your life. And he ends up eating the fruit on his own free will. And he does not respect God's authority in the one thing that God commanded him not to do, he did. And there are consequences to that. Well, what are the consequences? God intervenes here supernaturally. This is, and I can't emphasize this enough about this particular case and the case of when he judges sin with a worldwide flood. This is supernatural. It's miraculous. And if it's miraculous and it's supernatural, then he negates natural law. You cannot explain what happens here based in natural law. You can't explain what happens at the time of the flood with natural law. A lot of creationists try to do that. They get stuck. And they criticize this and criticize that. Wait a minute. It's God who's doing this miraculously, supernaturally. And he does this in creation, he does this at the curse, and he does this at the time of the judgment of the flood. He intervenes supernaturally. So God curses his perfect creation. His creation was perfect when he was done. As was said last night by Carl Kirby, it was very good. It was perfect. And man sinned, and now it's not going to be perfect anymore. So God uses his creative powers here, once again, in establishing this curse. And I'm going to show you some of the things he does scientifically now, which I can't explain because it's miraculous, but it had to have happened. So he makes supernatural changes to his creation. Well, what does he do? First thing he does is curse the animal kingdom. He uses the serpent as the example, but notice that the verse here This is in 3:14 of Genesis. And the Lord God said unto the serpent, because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle. It's cursed above all cattle, but all cattle are included. And above every beast of the field, That means that there's more to this curse that affects other animals than just the serpent. Upon thy belly thou shalt go. We have no idea what this animal looked like prior to the time it left the garden after the curse. We know what it looked like then because it was crawling on its belly. And dust shalt thou eat in all the days of thy life. Well, what does that describe? It describes a snake. There's no doubt about that. But what changed in the animals at this time? There were things that miraculously changed. The anatomy of that animal changed. Upon thy belly thou shalt go. What it looked like before, we have no idea. We don't know. But now we know it's crawling on its belly. There were physiological changes that occurred. Genetic or inheritable changes took place. The DNA had to be changed here. It had to be. Why? Because it had to be passed on to the next generations. How was that done? Through the DNA. That's how you pass on to successive generations. So that had to be changed. How did God do that? I have no idea. It's miraculous. It's a supernatural act. There are behavioral changes also that took place at this time with the animals. I'm using the serpent as an example, but there are other animals that had things changed also. So there were drastic anatomical changes, especially to this animal here. And the method of locomotion changed to crawling on its belly, essentially. It has no legs. It's a legless animal. And it has no front or rear legs. And, of course, if you see the skeleton of a snake, it doesn't have any legs at all. It's a vertebral column, essentially, and is able to move on its belly with no legs. Also involves physiological changes. The method of finding food for this animal changed. It says, dust thou shalt eat all the days of thy life. Well, is that true? Yes, that's true with a snake. Snake has a forked tongue, throws it out, picks up dust particles that are in the air, brings it back, and when it brings it back into the mouth, it rubs against the Jacobson's organ, which is a vomeronasal gland, and then it's able to detect with this forked tongue if there is a scent of a prey either on the left or right, and that's how it moves. That's how it's able to find its prey. It does it with a forked tongue. And it throws it out, figures out, there's a mouse on the left, so it moves over there and throws it out again until it knows that it's close enough, and then it can, of course, in the end, it'll see it. But that's how it finds its prey. It's exactly what the Bible talks about. It's exactly the same. God deals with Satan after the animals. And the part about Satan, I'm not going to go into a lot, but there's a promise of the Savior here. Genesis 3:15. Between thy seed and her seed, he shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Her seed, of course, is Jesus Christ. It bruises the head of Satan, which is a fatal blow, of course, which occurred on the cross. Thy seed, Satan, bruises his heel. That is the cross. It's a promise of a Savior coming. Now God turns and deals with Eve for the curse. In verse 16 it says, unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children. It takes changes anatomically and physiological changes for that to happen. How it happened, I don't know. It's supernatural. But for Eve to have labor pain and sorrow during childbirth, it takes a change in her nervous system to do that. It takes a change. And apparently, prior to that, she didn't have pain. But now you do. And of course, it takes a change in the DNA also, because the women here who've had babies know that it's still painful. And that was passed on from Eve throughout all females from then on. So successive generations experienced the same pain with childbirth. This took place immediately also. The change took place immediately. Because no doubt when she had labor pains, when Cain was born months later, she had pain. So this change would have had to take place immediately. Now God turns and deals with Adam. And unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it, cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow thou shalt eat of it all the days of thy life. So what's cursed of the ground? I don't know. There's a lot of people that have written a lot of different things on what they think the curse of the ground is. I don't know what it is, but it apparently something changed. Romans 22 suggests that there's a change, because Romans 8:22 says, for we know that the whole creation groaneth and travaileth in pain together up until now. The whole entire creation is groaning and travailing in pain because of Adam's sin. What that actually means, what's different now than was prior to the time of the curse, I don't know. And as I said, there's a lot of people that speculated, but it's all speculation because there's no way we will know. The plant kingdom, by the way, has also changed. There's thorns and thistles. So God is changing things to the point where it's almost like a recreation here. Death is a result of sin, as he says to Adam here in the 19th verse, till thou return unto the ground, for out of it was thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return. And we are made of dust. We know that the human body at chemical prices right now is worth about $160. But that's all we are. We're the building. We're made of building blocks, in other words. And we're made of basic elements, dust, in other words. Man will die and return to the basic elements, matter that his body was created from. Of course, that's where our body ends up, but we are made in the image of God, so our spirit is eternal, and that's what we need to be concerned about here. In other words, with all these changes, there were huge consequences. Essentially, as I said, almost like a recreation. God used his creative powers to change things here. And there were huge consequences because of sin. Now you get into the world that existed between the time of the curse until the flood occurs. What occurs? Sin in the world becomes worse and worse. It becomes unbelievably bad. What all occurred at that time, I've looked at this and talked about it in our Sunday school class fairly recently, but there's a lot of theories associated with what went on at that particular time too. I don't know for sure, but I can tell you that, as it says in Genesis 6:5, that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. It's just continuous evil continually on this earth. Satan is using all of his power, attempting to block what? The line to the Messiah. He knows that Jesus Christ will be born at some time through some line. So he tries to block the line to the Messiah in every way he possibly can. The 13th verse in chapter 6 says, and God said unto Noah, of course, we know that Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. It was Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. That's it, 8 people. 8 people got onto the ark, the rest gone. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me. For the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. He's going to destroy everything. Not only all the living, not only man, but everything that lives on the earth and the earth itself. So God supernaturally judges again. Here, don't get hung up on trying to understand how it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Don't get hung up on that type of thing, because it's supernatural. It's said. What does it say there in Genesis 7:4? God says, "I will cause." If He's going to cause it, it's going to be miraculous. We always think of miracles as something good. There was a miracle. Something wonderful happened. This is a miracle too, only it's not something wonderful. It's God's judgment. He uses His supernatural creative powers to judge this earth. I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made will I destroy. He's going to destroy everything from off the face of the earth. To preserve human and animal life on land, you had to be on the ark. If you're not on the ark, you're dead. The ark's dimensions are huge. If you just looking, you can see a person, by the way, standing in here. This is a full deal. I don't know that the ark looked like this. It looked like a barge, actually. That's what the ark honestly looks like. But it's about the size of this. This is about 75 feet wide, actually, and that's how wide the ark was. The peak here is about 40. I think it's 48 feet. So it's roughly, and the ark was 45 feet. So it's roughly about the same as this room, only flattened out on the top. And there would have been 3 levels in it. And I think this building has to be about maybe 100 or 150 feet longer to be the size of the ark. But the thing is huge, in other words. It's absolutely gigantic. Getting the animals to the ark. Now, God's involved in this. This is supernatural, what occurs here. Migration instituted by God. It's clearly stated in 3 places when it talks about the animals coming to the ark, that the animals came unto Noah. It's stated 3 different times that way. That's what happens. In other words, the animals that were saved, the pair of animals, it's just a pair of animals here, the male and female of every species, they are migrated to the ark. And not only to the ark, but I think they're migrated actually onto the ark where they're going to be. Migration is something that, as I state here, the instinct cannot be explained physiologically. How the Canadian geese come from Winnipeg and come down to Silver Lake and land here with that small bird brain they have. No one really understands. People understand a lot of times how that is triggered, but how they know their way and they fly all that distance and land on a lake that's not that big here. It's just not understood physiologically. But God gave the animals that were to be spared on the ark the instinct to migrate. And He does this prior to the flood, not after the time the flood starts. All this is prior to the flood. And as I said here, Noah didn't have to load the animals on the ark. They actually loaded themselves. And if you read that part of the book of Genesis, it clearly does say that Noah. What does Noah do? He gets onto the ark. That's all it says he does. It doesn't. He has to build it, of course. He does put food on there, but as far as loading the animals, he's not dragging a donkey up the gangplank to get them on, and it's not the idea that there's 10 giraffes standing there and only 2 get picked and all that kind of stuff. I've seen books like that, but it's not like that. 2 animals of every species migrate to the ark. Animal husbandry on the ark. Boy, this is right up my line. Over my career, I'm sure I've been in charge of caring for over 1 million animals. And they, for 35 years at the clinic and 5 years prior to that, the University of Minnesota, we had hundreds of thousands of animals. There's 100,000 mice at the Mayo Clinic right now. So the animals, as it's been calculated, can fit in 25 to 35% of the ark. Storage areas for food can be present there, but the thing God gives these animals is hibernation. Estivation is so-called summer sleep. It's kind of the same thing in hibernation, only occurs in desert animals. And it gives those animals the ability. So what occurs at that time is their inactive food and requirements go to zero. We studied hibernation here at Mayo for many, many years. We had bears, black bears, present almost all the time, almost through 20 years of my career here. We also had other animals that hibernated also, other species. So I kind of know something about this, and what our animal care staff would be very happy when these animals would hibernate. Because when they went to hibernation, they didn't have to do anything. They didn't have to clean up after them. They didn't have to feed them. They didn't have to worry about them. Nothing. We checked on our bears about once or twice a week, and that was it. And they were hibernating. They're sleeping. They didn't sleep for months. So I would say that this, and don't think that this hibernation isn't in a lot of species of animals. For instance, when I was in graduate school, I did my thesis on hamsters. We had a bunch of golden hamsters in a room. We lost heat to that particular room. Went in the next morning, all the hamsters were asleep, all of them. And they were, asleep. Their body temperatures dropped, and their heartbeats only about 8, maybe 10 beats per minute, when normally it's up around 300. They were out of it. And we had to warm the room back up, and of course then they woke up and started coming around. But every animal, there were hundreds of them in this room, and they were all sleeping. So it occurs in a lot of species that you might not even realize. So, 2 supernatural acts occur at the initiation of the judgment. 7:11 gives this. It says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, 2nd month, 17th day of the month, the same day, number 1, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and number 2, the windows of heaven were opened. 2 things happened. Fountains of the great deep were broken up. If you look at the earth today, you see it's divided up into these huge tectonic plates. And there's huge fault lines between this. And this is essentially what occurs when the fountains of the deep are broken up. These fault lines. In other words, the crust of this earth is actually just crushed. How does this happen? Well, God does it miraculously. But he's judging not only man, not only does he kill all the land animals and man, but he actually destroys the earth itself. And this is what we still have carried over from when that happened. And the second thing is the windows of heaven were opened. Well, it pours down rain. It just pours down rain for 40 days and 40 nights. It's interesting that a lot of creationists will take this and they do not have an explanation, and they all will admit that they don't have an explanation of how God broke the crust of the earth into the tectonic plates we have today. But then right away they'll try to figure out how this rain came down for 40 days and 40 nights, and you hear all kinds of things that, it can't be this or it can't be that. Wait a minute here. The first one you couldn't explain because you said it was a miracle of God. And then the second phrase you're going to try to explain with natural law? No. They're both supernatural. You can't explain something supernatural with natural law. You can't do it, so don't even try. How did Jesus turn water into wine? The pots had water in them. When they poured it out, it was wine. How does that happen chemically? Come on, it's a miracle. We don't know. The waters prevailed on this earth for 5 months. For 150 days, the waters was contributed from the fountains of the deep for 5 months, which is 4 times longer than the time period in which the rain came down. So this judgment is very severe. Then afterwards, after the judgment, after 5 months, then things start to readjust on the surface of the earth, and you get tectonic plates that provide uplifting force for mountain ranges. These are the Grand Tetons. We're looking at the eastern face of the Tetons here, and there's a huge fault at the base of this. This granite bedrock was pushed up. Well, what forces caused that to happen? Well, the forces of the tectonic plates pushing against that huge plate. That occurs all over the earth. That's how the mountains come up. Now, what I'm saying is not different than what the geologists and evolutionists will say. The only difference is the time difference. This occurred shortly after the time of the flood. They'll say the Tetons took millions and millions of years to get to the height they are today. Same thing with the canyons of the river. Here we've got a river down here, cut this huge canyon out, and they'll say that this river down here cut this canyon over millions and millions of years. No, it didn't. When that uplifting of mountains takes place, what happens? Well, the water runs off. It runs off in huge volumes, cuts through the newly formed sediments that are on the ground, and cuts that canyon in a very short period of time with a huge volume of water. Sedimentary rock, as you can see here, this great picture of sedimentary rock, is not a result of millions of years. It was formed rapidly at the time of the flood. If you look at the rate of sediment in a flood, it's about an inch every 5 minutes. It takes 220 days for the entire geological column to be laid down. 220 days, about just short of a year. So that sediment all came down within a year after the time of that the fountains of the deep were and the windows of heaven were closed. Evidence that this came down, that this happened quickly. Look at the way this sedimentary rock is bent. Look at the bends in this thing. This is a person standing here. But you can see these layers. Well, if these layers all represent millions and millions of years difference, how could that bend? It would fracture. It wouldn't bend at all. Now, geologists do have an explanation. They say that this is plastic. It's like plastic, and it's rock. It's not plastic. Our explanation is much, much better. Polystrate fossils. These are tree trunks. This one's down in coal here, cuts through a bunch of layers of sedimentary rock. How did that happen? That's a tree. Well, that tree would have been long gone, millions of years. It had to be buried all at the same time. These things are all over. Soft tissue from a Tyrannosaurus, and I gotta end this pretty quick. I just want to mention this, and Carl Kirby may say a little bit more about this. But this soft tissue from a Tyrannosaurus, they dug up a Tyrannosaurus in the West, found out that it had bone marrow in it, the soft tissue inside the bone, and it was still soft. It hadn't fossilized. 65 million years. Wait a minute, how does that work? They pulled it out and did microscopic sections. This is right up my alley because my PhD is in veterinary pathology. Anyway, there's vessels that are formed here. The interesting thing is that it looks like what is a reptilian red blood cell right there. Reptilian red blood cells are oval, will look just like that. They all have nucleated Only mammals don't have nucleated red blood cells, by the way. The amphibians, reptiles, fish, everything else, birds, they all have nucleated red blood cells, and they look just like that, just like it. So how does that work? How does that work when that animal is supposed to be fossilized for 65 million years? Doesn't work too well. Uniformitarianism, and this is one of the last slides, but uniformitarianism is really everything that's going on outside today is just like it has from the very beginning. Nothing's changed. 2 Peter 3:34, knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers. Scoffers. There's scoffers all over the place now. Walking after their own lusts and saying, where is the promise of his coming? That's why didn't God come back to this earth? For since the fathers fell asleep, and this is the uniformitarian part, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. They are not accepting the supernatural powers of God. The supernatural powers of God in creation, the supernatural powers of God when he cursed this earth, and the supernatural powers of God when he judged this earth with a worldwide flood.